Some of the most visible marketing functions in the agricultural marketing channel are the business logistics, or the physical functions. The physical functions consist of three main types. That is, transportation, storage, and then processing. So transportation is very important when it comes to agriculture because it moves agricultural products basically from the farm gate to the consumer and usually making several stops in between. It allows us to get that good from a place of relatively low demand to one of relatively high demand. Because let's face it, who wants to come onto your individual farm or ranch and buy your steers? How many consumers want to? But rather, the consumers would rather go to their convenience store or their grocery store and buy their meat there, or maybe the meat processing place. They're going to go to an individual store in their hometown rather than drive out to your particular ranch and harvest that animal themselves. So transportation is very important. And another thing with transportation is the relatively low cost of transportation has allowed the increase in specialization. In the United States, oftentimes, the place where we grow our food or we raise our food is very much separated from the place where they actually consume it. For example, they might be growing fruits and nuts in California, and those fruits and nuts are transported all the way across the United States to the East Coast for consumption there. So we must rely on transportation to get it across the United States. And because of the relatively low cost, it allows us to become more specialized. Because of the low cost, we can grow wheat in the wheat belt of the United States and then truck it to where it needs to go to be processed. We can grow fruits and nuts in California and have it trucked over to the East Coast and still make a profit off of it. If the transportation costs were actually higher than what they are, then what we would see is that the specialization would actually decrease, and all these individual little places would start growing their own specialty fruits and nuts and incurring the cost because the cost of transportation would be so much higher. The next physical function is storage. So there's a little quote that says, every product has to be somewhere. So that kind of sums up storage in a nutshell. Everything has to be somewhere. And for many businesses, it is a primary source of revenue. It is a primary source of income, is storing those agricultural goods. But for the majority of the businesses, it's a secondary activity. It's a secondary profitable activity. There are certain select businesses that are in business purely to store agricultural commodities. But for the majority of the agricultural businesses, it's just a secondary activity that is necessary for them in order to maintain their levels of what they need or to just store their commodity until it's time to actually sell it. Now, there's another thing that I want to bring your attention to, and that's a convenience yield. A lot of times, the macroeconomy or the macro view does not incentivize you keeping and storing products. You see, storage costs money. It often costs a lot of money, and that's either providing the cooling for that product if necessary, or to fulfill any kind of special requirements for that product, or even just maintaining a grain silo out in the middle of a farm. It costs money to maintain storage. And on top of that, the longer that product sits in your grain bin, the less valuable it is. So unless you allow market prices to go up right after harvest or after harvest gets done, then it usually doesn't make much sense, or sometimes it cannot make much sense to actually store your good. A lot of times, it does provide an incentive to store your good, but in some cases, there's not always that incentive. So, if certain businesses might go out and create production contracts requiring them to have a certain level of that commodity on hand throughout the whole year. Well, at times, whenever the economy or the markets are not incentivizing you, the producer, to keep that storage, that individual firm that must maintain that supply might offer a convenience yield. This convenience yield is basically going out and saying, if you keep this product in storage for this long, we'll pay you an additional amount just for you to keep that product for us. So whenever the macro level doesn't incentivize storing it, sometimes this micro level, you have to offer that incentive for that micro level decision to maintain that storage. And the reason that this convenience yield usually comes about is because the A certain company has a production contract that's requiring them to keep X amount of supply on hand throughout the year. And oftentimes, it's cheaper to pay this convenience yield to get an individual producer, an individual or multiple producers to store their products, even though it doesn't, the macro economy isn't allowing that to be a profitable venture for them, but they'll pay them that convenience yield because it's cheaper to pay the convenience yield than to break that contract. And then the last physical function is this processing. This is known as the manufacturing stage. This is the part where they're taking the raw commodities, they're taking that indistinguishable, homogeneous commodity, and they're turning it into something that is suitable for the consumer. Sometimes differentiated goods, or sometimes just a different type of product that's sitting on the shelf in the grocery store. This is where they take that wheat, that corn, and they turn that into flour, or they turn that into some kind of milling product. It can be bought by customers, or turn their final distinguishable products, such as bread or something of that nature. This is where they take wheat and turn it into bread. So this includes often inspecting, sorting, slaughtering, cutting, curing, baking, packaging, and things of that nature. It's that process of turning that raw agricultural good into something that is suitable for the consumer. Then we also got this concept of separability of commodities. It basically says that every commodity produces several co-products. So if we look at, say, a steer, for example, and we just break down that steer, whenever harvested and slaughtered, is going to produce probably ribeyes, roasts, hamburger meat. It's going to produce hide, offal, and there's multiple parts that are taken off of one steer. The same thing whenever you look at, say, cotton. If you take a cotton boll and you separate it out, you got the cotton seeds, you got cottonseed oil, you've got the cotton fibers as well. You can take every agricultural product or every commodity and separate it out, and it produces several co-products. And it is essential for an agribusiness to understand the aspects of co-products in order to maximize their profitability off of that commodity. Rather than focusing on just one good, they have to look at the whole picture off of that one particular item and be able to separate it out and make the most out of it across all of these components of just a single commodity. So the macro view of processing is essentially it turns raw goods into individual consumable products. It turns raw agricultural commodities into consumable products that a customer might want, a consumer might actually want. That's the macro view, the big picture. Whereas the micro view, it says that this processing is often a very essential and very profitable aspect of an individual agribusiness.